The rain had just begun to fall when Daniel Carter stepped out of his black luxury car and walked toward the small roadside cafe. The city lights reflected on the wet pavement, and people rushed past him with umbrellas and hurried steps. Daniel didn't notice any of them. At 38, he had built an empire worth billions, and the world had long stopped surprising him. Inside the cafe, the atmosphere was warm and simple. A few customers sat quietly, sipping coffee while soft music played in the background. Behind the counter stood a young woman named Emma. She looked tired but focused, carefully serving each customer with a polite smile. Daniel had never been to this cafe before. His usual places were five-star restaurants and private lounges, but tonight his driver had taken a wrong turn, and the rain made him stop here. Emma noticed the expensive suit immediately. People like him rarely came to places like this. "Good evening, sir," she said softly. "What can I get for you?" "Black coffee," Daniel replied, placing his phone on the counter without even looking up. Emma prepared the coffee quickly and handed it to him. For a moment, Daniel studied her face. There was something unusual about her calm expression, something that didn't match the modest surroundings. "You don't look like someone who belongs here," he said casually. Emma gave a faint smile. "People say that sometimes." Daniel took a sip of his coffee. It was surprisingly good. Just then, a loud voice came from the corner table where two well-dressed men were sitting. They were laughing and talking about business deals. One of them, Victor Langford, was a rival businessman who had recently been trying to compete with Daniel's company. Victor noticed Daniel and smirked. Well, if it isn't the great Daniel Carter," he said loudly. "Did the billionaire get lost?" The cafe suddenly felt quieter. Daniel turned slowly toward him. "Victor," he said calmly. "Didn't expect to see you here either." Victor walked over, clearly enjoying the attention. "I heard your company's latest project is struggling," he said mockingly. "Maybe the king of business isn't so untouchable after all." Daniel leaned back slightly, completely relaxed. "Careful," he replied. "Rumors can be dangerous." Victor laughed. "Oh, come on. Everyone knows your investors are getting nervous. Maybe you should start calling people for help." Emma quietly cleaned the counter, pretending not to listen. Victor glanced at her and suddenly got an idea. "Actually," he said, smiling cruelly, "why don't we make this interesting?" Daniel raised an eyebrow. Victor pointed at Emma. "Let the waitress decide who's more powerful." Emma froze. Daniel looked mildly amused. Victor continued, "You can call anyone you want, Carter. Anyone in the world. If that person walks into this cafe within the next hour to support you, I'll publicly admit you're still the most powerful man in this city." Daniel chuckled. "And if they don't, then you admit your empire isn't as strong as you claim." A few customers started whispering. Emma felt uncomfortable. "This isn't necessary," she said quietly. But Victor waved her off. "What do you say, Carter? Or are you afraid?" Daniel slowly picked up his phone and looked at Victor with a calm smile. "You're very confident." Victor leaned closer. "Call whoever you want." Daniel laughed softly. Laughed the millionaire. "Call whoever you want." The cafe fell silent as Daniel unlocked his phone. Victor crossed his arms. "Go ahead." Daniel scrolled through his contacts for a moment. Then he stopped on one name. Without hesitation, he pressed the call button. The phone rang only once. "Daniel." A deep voice answered immediately. "Yes," Daniel said calmly. "I need a small favor." Victor rolled his eyes. "What kind of favor?" The voice asked. "Could you come to a small cafe on Westbrook Street?" There was a brief pause. "I'll be there in 20 minutes." Daniel ended the call and placed the phone back on the table. Victor burst out laughing. "That's it. That's your big move." Daniel simply sipped his coffee. Emma watched him carefully. She didn't understand why he looked so relaxed. 10 minutes passed. Victor kept mocking him. "Maybe your friend got lost," he joked. Another 5 minutes passed. Then suddenly, the sound of multiple black SUVs stopping outside filled the street. The cafe door opened. Several men in dark suits stepped inside first, scanning the room carefully. The customers looked confused. Emma's heart started beating faster. Then the final person walked in. An older man with silver hair and a powerful presence. The entire cafe seemed to freeze. Victor's smile disappeared instantly. "Impossible," he whispered. The man walking toward Daniel was none other than Richard Hale, one of the most influential investors in the country. A man whose financial decisions could make or destroy entire corporations. Richard approached Daniel and smiled warmly. "You sounded serious on the phone," he said. Daniel stood up casually, just settling a small argument. Richard glanced at Victor. "And this is?" Victor suddenly looked pale. I didn't know." Richard raised an eyebrow. "You didn't know Daniel Carter as my business partner?" The room exploded with whispers. Emma stared in shock. Victor stepped back slowly. Daniel folded his arms and looked at him calmly. "So," Daniel said quietly, "do you still want me to call someone else?" Victor shook his head quickly. No, that won't be necessary." Richard chuckled. "I hope this man wasn't bothering you." Daniel shrugged. "Just entertainment." Victor grabbed his coat, clearly desperate to leave. "I think I should go." "Good idea," Richard replied calmly. Victor rushed out of the cafe without saying another word. The room slowly returned to normal, but the atmosphere had completely changed. Richard turned to Daniel again. "You rarely call for small favors." Daniel smiled slightly. "Sometimes people need reminders." Richard laughed. "Well, next time pick a nicer restaurant." He shook Daniel's hand and left the cafe with his security team. The SUVs drove away, leaving the quiet street exactly as it had been before. Emma finally spoke. "Was that really Richard Hale?" Daniel nodded. Emma looked stunned. "You called one of the most powerful investors in the country, just to win a bet?" Daniel smiled gently. "Not exactly." Emma frowned slightly. "Then why?" Daniel looked around the small cafe. "Because people like Victor think power is about intimidation." He picked up his coffee again. "But real power," he continued calmly, "is about loyalty." Emma thought about that for a moment. "Still," she said slowly, "it must be nice knowing someone that important." Daniel looked at her curiously. "You don't seem impressed." Emma shrugged. "Money and influence don't always mean respect." Daniel leaned slightly forward. "Interesting answer." Emma continued cleaning the counter. "I've seen rich people treat others terribly." Daniel watched her carefully. "And what do you think of me?" Emma met his eyes calmly. "I don't know you." Daniel smiled. "Fair enough." Just then, the cafe door opened again. A small boy ran inside, slightly out of breath. "Mom." Emma immediately turned. "Leo, I told you to stay at home." The boy hugged her tightly. "I got scared when the storm started." Daniel watched the moment quietly. Leo noticed him and waved shyly. "Hi." Daniel waved back. "How old are you?" 6, Leo said proudly. Emma looked embarrassed. "Sorry, sir. He wasn't supposed to come here." Daniel shook his head. "No problem." Leo stared at Daniel's expensive watch. "Are you rich?" he asked innocently. Emma's face turned red. "Leo." But Daniel laughed. "A little." Leo thought for a moment. "Then why are you drinking coffee here?" Emma tried not to smile. Daniel looked around the simple cafe again. "Because sometimes the best places aren't expensive ones." Leo seemed satisfied with that answer. Emma watched Daniel differently now. The arrogant billionaire she expected didn't seem to exist. Instead, he looked like someone surprisingly normal. After a few minutes, Daniel finished his coffee and stood up. "How much?" he asked. Emma shook her head. "It's on the house." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "That wouldn't be fair." Emma smiled slightly. "Consider it payment for the most dramatic evening this cafe has ever had." Daniel chuckled. "All right." He took out his wallet but paused before leaving. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I think I'll come back here." Emma looked surprised. "Really?" "Yes." Leo grinned. "Bring more rich friends next time." Daniel laughed. "I'll try." As Daniel stepped outside into the rainy night, he glanced back through the cafe window. Emma and Leo were laughing together. For the first time that evening, Daniel felt something unusual. Peace. He got into his car, but before the driver started the engine, Daniel said quietly, "Find out everything about that cafe." The driver nodded. "Yes, sir." The car disappeared into the night, leaving behind a simple cafe where a billionaire had just learned something he hadn't expected. Sometimes the most powerful connections aren't the ones you call. They're the ones you discover by accident.